We are continuing on our Scream review series here in the lead up to Scream 7 as we move on to Scream 4. Let's talk about it. What's happening? What's happening? What's happening? Welcome back into JC's Movies, where you can see all kind of movie and TV show talk with me, JC, especially within the superhero, comedy, and of course the horror genres, as we're going to talk about today as we continue our Scream review series with 2011's Scream 4. 11 years later from Scream 3, finally get another Scream sequel. And, just to kind of drive home that timeline and how long of a difference it was, I was 7 when Scream 3 came out, and I was a senior in high school when Scream 4 came out, which luckily was the first one I had a chance to go see in theaters, which that was a whole experience in and of itself. We get about 3/4 of the way through the movie, and then the projector died out, had to go back another day to finish it and get the Ghostface reveal and all of that. So that might have took away from my initial view of Scream 4, but I think it's one that's grown on me over the years. I do actually enjoy this, and I enjoyed it on my rewatch here for this review, and we'll get set to dive into it, talking spoilers, going through the entire plot momentarily. But before I get there, just a quick reminder, if you would, if you haven't yet, be sure you hit that subscribe button. Not only are we doing a ton of Scream coverage in the lead up to Scream 7, going through reviewing every movie, we'll have a Scream 7 review out, a lot of other Scream content here with Scream 7 almost upon us, but we're also talking horror movies a ton here on the channel, bringing you movie news daily as we bring you movie news updates every Monday through Friday. So plenty of reason to subscribe here if you're a fan of movies. And you can also help out just by hitting that like button, giving this video that thumbs up. We'll help it hit that YouTube algorithm so it can find other movie fans like you and me. With that out of the way, I guess we'll get ready to dive in here to Scream 4. Obviously, spoilers abound as we get set to dive into the plot. But just kind of general overview before we do. One of the main things you got to address when you're talking about Scream 4 is, of course, this is the final Scream movie directed by Wes Craven. Rest in peace to a legend. Kevin Williamson also back to write this one after, not getting a chance to write Scream 3, and that was Aaron Kruger, and you guys kind of heard my thoughts on that one in the Scream 3 review. So very happy to have Kevin Williamson back, one of my all-time favorite writers, and of course, great to see Wes Craven in the director's chair for a Scream movie one final time here in 2011. With that out of the way, let's talk about this movie. And of course, we've got to lead off with the opening, which I think does some good things, but I kind of have mixed feelings about, just because I think this is an opening in Scream 4 that on your initial watch, it's pretty cool with the shock value, kind of the fake outs they give you. But on rewatch, I don't know how much it holds up necessarily. I think it's one of those things that's good initially, but then when you rewatch it, you're just kind of like, meh with it, or at least that's how I feel. But anyway, I do like some things that they reference here in the opening, as they reference Saw, as they are immediately kind of trying to deconstruct where horrors went in the last 11 years since the last Scream movie. They even, reference torture porn and stuff, which something I'm not the biggest fan of. I love the first Saw movie. I think it did go too far, torture porn, and then that kind of created a whole genre of that beyond there. So, to go back to Scream here in 2011 and hear them talk a little bit about that, I thought was a nice touch, because you guys know me, my favorite subgenre of horror by far is the slasher movie. So happy to see, a slasher movie return and kind of poke fun at where horror had gone in the meantime in the 11 years since the last Scream movie. And they also reference someone stalking them on Facebook. And, of course, we know this to be Ghostface after a little bit, but it shows that this is a new age, and Ghostface will use more than just the phone calls, which is, kind of something new for the franchise here, getting to incorporate technology into it as well. Although the phone calls still stay here, landlines were still a little bit more prevalent in 2011. And from there, we get into kind of the part where I'm talking about, on your initial watch, it's cool, but then, in subsequent rewatches, I think it loses value. And that's Ghostface, kills both of the girls here in the opening. I think one of them's Lucy Hale. And then all of a sudden it's revealed, oh, it's Stab 6. And 2 other girls are watching that, which I think is Anna Paquin and Kristen Bell, if I'm not mistaken. And, good shock value on that initial watch. But then after that, they put a hat on a hat, in my opinion, because then, Kristen Bell stabs Anna Paquin, and that's revealed to be the opening of Stab 7. It's almost too meta right there in my opinion, but maybe that's the movie kind of poking fun at itself a little bit. But from there, we're in the true opening as we see Amy Teagarden, aka Julie from Friday Night Lights, which funny enough, Friday Night Lights ended in 2011, same movie, same year that this movie came out. So capitalizing a little bit on, her stardom at the time with Friday Night Lights being as big as it was, one of my all-time favorite shows, by the way. But now we're in the true opening. So we've had a fake out Stab 6 opening, a fake out Stab 7 opening, now the true opening to Scream 4, featuring, Julie Taylor from Friday Night Lights. And she's talking to her friend kind of about the Stab franchise. And that's where we learned that, they're up to Stab 8 now, I guess at this point, about to be. And we learned that Stab 1 through 3 were based off of Sydney's actual story, but then she sued, or threatened to sue them rather. So then the rest of them became fictional. As she goes on to say, Stab 5 is based on time travel, which is the worst. Basically, Craven and Williamson taking a piss on horror sequels in a horror sequel, which is kind of clever in my opinion. Of course, those two characters there, the Julie Taylor character's name is Jenny. The other character that's with her name is Marnie. Jenny is taken out, and Marnie is taken out by Ghostface, with Jenny, being the last one getting killed, and she gets killed in the garage, which, kind of is a little bit of a callback to, maybe that OG Scream and the Tatum kill, which I do like there, getting those callbacks. I don't think they did it as much here in Scream 4 as we got in Scream 5, and I'm a sucker for that type of stuff. I know a lot of people are like, oh my gosh, they're doing this nostalgia bait or whatever. But that's my shit. I love it. I love when they do that. So that's one of the reasons I love Scream 5. But we'll get there. We'll get there. Out here in Scream 4, following that opening kill of Jenny and Marnie, we get the title drop accompanied by a great needle drop. Of course, a pro there, and, classic Scream move to be able to do something like that and, move forward from there, where we are reintroduced to Sydney, who's back in Woodsboro for a book signing, as she's now written a book of her own. Oh, how the turntables have turned. Her book is titled Out of Darkness. Not long after that, we're reintroduced to Dewey as well, as he is awoken by his phone ringing. And I thought it was a great touch that his ringtone is Axel F., that Beverly Hills Cop theme, which is so fitting, I think, for Dewey. I pretty much laughed out loud on that one. And then we see Gail also beside him in bed. So we learn here in Scream 4, the two are still married. From there, we were introduced to another character that would become a fan favorite following this movie, and that is Hayden Panettiere's character of Kirby, as she speeds by as Dewey walks outside of his house, and kind of reveals to us that Dewey is no longer Deputy Dewey. He's now the sheriff, as, she sees him and she says, "Sorry, sheriff." And so that's when, kind of your first hint, oh, Dewey's the sheriff now, which is pretty cool. The town itself, has kind of started to take the murders, I guess, a little bit less seriously, probably because it's been a long time since they've happened, I guess, in this universe, since we know it's been 11 years since Scream 3, as people have begun, putting Ghostface masks all over the light fixtures in town, as it is the anniversary of the Woodsboro murders, and Dewey with a great quote there saying, one generation's tragedy is the next one's joke, and that kind of hammers home how Woodsboro currently feels about this, but they're in for a rude awakening, of course, as we are introduced to a new member of the cast as well. Now, Sheriff Dewey's Deputy Judy Hicks, and she has made Dewey some lemon squares, which those will come back momentarily, as her and Gail kind of have a little rivalry thing going on. Speaking of Gail, she's now trying to become a fiction writer versus, writing based on real events. She's struggling to do so. But from there, we go to the high school for the first time. And when we do, you get that classic Scream score kicking in for the first time, which is always great. You love that feel, that light little hum, Scream score that we always constantly hear throughout this franchise. And there at the high school, we are introduced to Robbie Mercer, who is kind of the Randy Meeks type character in this film, although I would argue we get two of those type of characters. But this one, they definitely hammer home by giving him the exact same initials, RM, as Randy Meeks, with Robbie Mercer here, who he actually kind of brings a different element to this film, which is something new that they tried to do here in Scream 11, incorporating more of that technology, like I talked about earlier, as he kind of has a headset with a camera on it. I guess you could call it a makeshift GoPro, if you will. And he's live streaming, when the three girls that we were introduced to earlier arrive, those being Jill, played by Emma Roberts, who Kirby picked up, and Olivia, who is their other friend. And of course, while they were on their way to school, Jill got a phone call from Jenny, one of the girls that was killed in the opening, and we hear a Ghostface voice. From there, Olivia reveals that she got a similar phone call from Marnie earlier that morning. So we know Ghostface is, calling these two girls off two of the victims' cell phones, one thing that we learned there. But anyways, we're back at the school. Robbie Mercer sees, the three girls coming up. He's live streaming. We kind of see that POV of what the live stream looks like through his camera as he tries to, talk to the three girls. And I like the inclusion of the live stream element in this film for a change. Gives it a more modern feel. And I think you got to utilize a little bit of that technology when you're to this point in the franchise. And then we are introduced to his friend, who I would say is the second, Randy Meeks type character, and that is Charlie, played by Rory Culkin. Got a Culkin in this movie, and I think Rory Culkin's an underrated actor personally. And we learned that both of these guys are film junkies, as I said, kind of giving us two Randy Meeks type of characters in this film. From there, once we're in the school, we are introduced to Jill's ex-boyfriend, Trevor. And immediately, they kind of try to make him a red herring as Robbie, live streaming asks him, what's your favorite scary movie? And he says, I'll show you, and growls at Robbie. They're obviously trying to give him, Billy Loomis type vibes in this movie. But we go from, our introduction to a lot of the high school characters in the school there back to Sydney's book signing that she is at, where Dewey shows up. And all of a sudden, he apologizes to Sydney immediately upon his arrival, because they're kind of having to lock that place down, as he has traced a phone that had been taken from the murder scene to that location where the book signing is happening. And they find that phone in Sydney's trunk with blood and a knife. And this is creative by the writers and, creative in the script, in my opinion, because this is how you get Sydney to not leave town. She was just there for a book signing. But when they find this phone, and I guess you could say it was, creative by, the Ghostface in this movie as well. But when they find the phone and the knife and the blood in her trunk, that essentially makes Sydney, if not a suspect, at least a person of interest. So, police aren't going to allow her to leave town. So it's a great way to keep her around in Woodsboro. Not long thereafter, flashback to the school. And in a classroom scene, I think that this also hammers home kind of that we're in a more modern era, as we start to hear every kid in the classroom's phone go off kind of simultaneously, and they're all notified of the murders of Jenny and Marnie there from the opening of this movie. And then we are introduced to that rivalry that I teased a little bit earlier between Deputy Judy and Gail, as Gail, has a great quote where she's trying to insert herself into this investigation, and Judy's telling her, she can't because she's trying to get into Sheriff Dewey's office as he's, conducting an interview with Sydney. And she, has a great quote saying, are you familiar with the phrase, I wrote the book on this? Because I wrote the book on this, as she makes her way into, Dewey's office and slams the door in front of Deputy Judy's face. And once she's in there, her and Dewey kind of have a little bit of an argument as well, as he's just trying to follow police protocol and tells her, he essentially can't let her help on this one. And she says that that's fine. She's going to go rogue then and do it herself if Dewey's not willing to work with her, which he's not. And on her way out, we get one of the first, well, not the first comedy moments, but one of the better comedy moments in the movie, because I love it. On her way out, she tells, Deputy Judy, your lemon squares taste like ass. Just driving home that rivalry and giving Gail a nice comedy quote there as well. And then not long thereafter, the three girls from the high school that we met earlier in the film are at the police station as well. We learned that Kirby is a big fan of horror movies and that she really loves Sidney Prescott because her life kind of inspired her love for horror movies. Maybe painting her as a red herring a little bit, trying to, potentially. We're also introduced to Rebecca Walters, not long thereafter, played by Allison Brie, who is Sydney's publicist / assistant, and she's a big fan of Gail Riley. And I think in a lot of ways that maybe trying to give her some red herring vibes as well. Maybe a little bit of a callback to Debbie Salt in Scream 2, with the way that Rebecca Walters first approaches Gail, kind of seeming like she's obsessed with her, much like Debbie Salt did in that first encounter with Gail back in Scream 2 as well. After some witty interactions about Kirby being nervous that she didn't get a phone call when the other two girls did, and wondering if that means that she's going to be next, and some fun stuff like that. Later that night, we're back at Jill's house, and who comes climbing through the window? Trevor, sneaking into Jill's bedroom, giving us some more callbacks to that OG Scream movie. And Sydney opens the door and sees them there together and, just kind of stares for a second. And then she's like, you remind me of me, driving it home, just in case you didn't get that OG Scream callback with him coming through the window. As Sydney goes to leave the room, she meets up with Deputy Judy, who kind of informs to her that they went to high school together, which was kind of unbeknownst to Sydney. But the way they kind of present this scene, super dark lighting as Judy's telling her this, oh man, we're supposed to believe, I think, that Judy could be a red herring as well, which I think that's something that in the first act here, they go or do a lot of legwork to try and do anyways, is to try and set up multiple red herrings here early on. But one thing that Dewey promised Sydney was 24-hour police surveillance. And so outside of Jill's house, where Sydney and Jill's mom, who of course is Sydney's aunt, Maureen Prescott's sister is, we have two cops, two of the other deputies, and we get another nice couple of cameos here in the franchise as Adam Brody and Anthony Anderson play the other two deputies here that are outside of the house protecting Jill and Sydney. Back inside the house, Kirby's there with Jill, watching a horror movie, just there to keep her company, so to speak. They're watching Shaun of the Dead, actually. And funny enough, Olivia pulls up, who is the next door neighbor, the other friend, and they invite her up. And Olivia calls Sydney the angel of death and says, next door is close enough. She doesn't want to be there because Sydney's there and she feels like she's the angel of death, so to speak. But as Kirby and Jill are in the bedroom, Jill's phone receives a call from Trevor, which Kirby answers for her, telling her, she's screening all her calls from past ex-boyfriends or something along those lines. But I do like this scene that we get into here. It's probably one of my favorite scenes from the movie, as, Ghostface on the phone says, "How's the movie?" To which Kirby responds, "What movie?" And then Ghostface knows. He says, "Shaun of the Dead." And Kirby obviously wants to know then, "How did you know that?" And you get a great line from Ghostface, "Because I'm standing in the closet," which of course Kirby immediately says, "Okay, I'm going to call your bluff," and goes to, open the closet door, flings it open, but no one is there. And then we get, an awesome line right here from Ghostface saying, "I never said I was in your closet," as he busts out of the closet next door and takes out the other friend, Olivia. A great misdirect and, one of the better moments in Scream 4, in my opinion. When I think of this movie, that's definitely one scene that usually stands out to me, is that one there. I love that call interaction and the way that thing played out. Of course, upon hearing this, Sydney, still ever the badass, immediately runs next door, but she finds Olivia disemboweled and a room absolutely covered in blood. I'm talking one of the most bloody scenes that I've seen probably in a Scream movie is right there in Scream 4 when she finds Olivia there laying on the bed, which leads to Sydney getting a call from Ghostface for the first time here in Scream 4. Jill then shows up at the house. Sydney tells her not to look. She tells Sydney that Olivia said that, you were the angel of death. As immediately, once she says that, we don't really get to get much of a reaction because guess who pops out? Ghostface. He's still there in the house and he slashes Jill's forearm before Sydney then fights him off. And of course, he escapes just before the two deputies that are supposed to be protecting the house arrive. And then in one of the next scenes, we get Sydney firing Rebecca Walters, the publicist that we mentioned earlier, because she is trying to essentially just sell Sydney on the potential cash grab that these murders could present for her, which obviously isn't going to sit well for Sydney. So then Rebecca heads out to the parking garage, kind of upset after then, and she receives a call from Ghostface, and she is taken out in the parking garage, and Ghostface says, "You are the message," as he told her, because she asked if he wanted her, or if she wanted him to take a message for Sydney. And Ghostface says, "No, you are the message," as he throws her body off the parking garage, and she lands on a news van, because what's going on down below? Dewey is holding a press conference directly below. So indeed, she was the message, just as Ghostface stated. From there, we get Gail kind of orchestrating a cinema club appearance by both her and Sydney, because Gail kind of has figured out that whoever is doing these killings is most likely a film junkie, so she definitely wants to get into that cinema club that Robbie and Charlie run there at the high school, which is where they kind of run down the rules of the remake, so to speak. And, one of the main things that they underlie is, hey, to survive nowadays in this modern era, you pretty much have to be gay. That's the only way that you can survive, is one of the things that they outline here at this point. But we also learn that there is a stab-a-thon that takes place every year where all 7 stab movies are played back to back, secret location, but it's essentially just, a big party that these kids end up having and watch all 7 stab movies in a row. Of course, Gail manages to find out where it's going to be this year, shows up at that event in disguise by, wearing a Ghostface mask to fit in, as there's a lot of people there in Ghostface costumes to celebrate the movies. And of course, what does she do? She plants cameras. That feels familiar, doesn't it? Another OG Scream callback, I guess you could say. But as the kids begin watching Stab 1 there at the Stab-a-thon, we get a new Easter egg for the Stab movie and find out in the credits that's listed there that Stab 1 was directed by Robert Rodriguez, something that I don't remember seeing in the past. Could be wrong there, but another Easter egg there for the Stab movies. Of course, Gail makes her way back out, begins to watch the feed from her cameras, when all of a sudden, 3 out of the 4 get blacked out, and all of a sudden, Ghostface pops up on one of the cameras as he kind of holds it up close, like he's taking a selfie or some shit. The crowd, watching Stab 1 is kind of very reminiscent to me of the opening of Scream 2. As we're seeing them kind of enjoy watching this Stab movie, everyone in Ghostface costumes. To me, that's almost another callback to Scream 2 and that opening that we got in that movie. Of course, from there, Gail goes back in to check on her cameras, and she is attacked by Ghostface, who stabs her in the shoulder before Dewey shows up to save her, and she reveals to him that there was another camera there that wasn't hers. And she has a nice quote here, which I think is a nice touch by Ghostface, which we kind of learn a little bit more about once we get to the third act. But she says, this time it feels like Ghostface is making the movie because he was trying to, essentially record his killings with another camera that he had set up there. Back at Jill's house, we get a, kind of funny exchange between Anthony Anderson and Adam Brody talking about how cops survive in movies, action movies, horror movies. And they're like, you pretty much got to be Bruce Willis. Of course, they both end up getting taken out. And I think it's Adam Brody maybe Anthony Anderson, that when he dies, he's like, fuck Bruce Willis after their exchange earlier, which is another good bit of comedy. But they both also hit the I'll be right back line. And we get kind of multiple people using that line in this film, which I think is a nice touch. Not long after that, Sydney gets her second call from Ghostface as he threatens to take out her family, and then follows up on that immediately by attacking and killing her aunt. From there, we move to Kirby's house, where Robbie, Charlie, and Jill are all there. And of course, Trevor shows up, Jill's ex-boyfriend, claiming he got an invite from Jill via text message, which everyone else is kind of skeptical of. But we're entering our third act location here, which not long after being there, Robbie Mercer finds himself outside, kind of walking around, hears a strange noise, and asks, who's there? Which, if you remember, that's another OG Scream callback right there in the original opening. You never ask who's there. You may as well go outside and investigate a strange noise or something, as Ghostface told Casey Becker. So another nice callback there, in my opinion. But while outside, he's attacked by Ghostface, and he gets taken out despite trying to claim, wait, there's rules. I'm gay. If it helps. Which pretty much debunks their earlier theory as they went over the rules, as Ghostface takes him out anyway. And of course, as we would expect, Sydney shows up there at Kirby's house. When she does, Trevor and Charlie are both MIA, as she talks to Kirby and Jill before being attacked and chased by Ghostface, who pops out at that point. Kirby finds Charlie banging on the back door, blood all on his hands, and he claims it's Robbie's blood because he just found his body. Sydney there with Kirby, advises her, hey, if you feel like you can't trust him, then don't open the door. Kirby heeds that advice, tells him, she's sorry, but she can't open the door. Then all of a sudden, Ghostface pops up behind him, knocks him out, and we get him tied to a chair with his mouth taped up outside the glass door. Another OG Scream callback here, as, he's very reminiscent of Steve in the original Scream movie there, Stephen Orth, the boyfriend of Casey Becker from the original Scream opening, which of course they hammer home by Ghostface calling Kirby and, begins the game, the quiz, if you will, quizzing her on horror movies. And of course, we know that she likes them. We've kind of learned that earlier in the movie. He starts off asking her, Jason's weapon, which she answers correctly, followed by the same for Michael Myers, Leatherface, and Freddy, which she gets all three of those correct as well. And I love, shouting out all of the classic Mount Rushmore slashers, if you will, there in that scene. But then he tries to ask her a question about which remake of the groundbreaking horror movie, and she just cuts him off, and she just reels off so many slasher franchises that have had remakes, which is really awesome. And that just kind of shows the smarts of Kirby, the movie knowledge of Kirby. And, I think it's just a really cool scene there to have her just be like, nah, fuck this. I'm just going to name them all so I can't be wrong, which is a really cool moment, in my opinion, in this movie, as Ghostface kind of doesn't respond. And she says, it's one of those, right? I got it right. And she goes outside immediately then to save Charlie, heads outside, unties him, telling Charlie, Ghostface tried to beat me, but I got it right. I fucking won. And then immediately, as soon as Charlie is untied, stabs Kirby twice in the stomach, which not a bad fake out to me. I probably should have seen it coming, knowing how things went in the OG Scream. Billy was attacked and then ended up being Ghostface. We kind of get a similar aspect of that here with Charlie, but still, it got me upon my first watch of this movie, and I think it's pretty decent. Fake out there. Charlie then comes inside and attacks Sydney, but she breaks free before Ghostface pops out, showing up and stabbing Sydney. And then, of course, we get the reveal, Ghostface pulling off the mask. And who is it? It's Jill. Still just not my favorite reveal, man. I don't know if it's just because Emma Roberts is so petite and it's just kind of hard to believe or what, but I was just never a big fan of Jill being Ghostface. I think the motive and the story and the way they go from here with kind of the explanation of their plan is good, but just her being Ghostface has always kind of bumped me, and she's always kind of been one of my least favorites just because of that. So that's just kind of how I always felt about those two Ghostface reveals. I think kind of the one of revealing Charlie was a good little fake out. And I'm like, okay. And then as soon as they revealed Jill, I just remember kind of feeling like, really? And still kind of feel that way a little bit here, even though I do like where the movie goes from this point. As of course, Jill and Charlie then reveal they've been filming all the kills. As Charlie says, he has great footage of his Robbie kill. And Jill says, great, they'll cut it up and upload it later, making it all traceable to Trevor, who they intend to frame as, kind of the new Billy Loomis. As Jill then kills Trevor, not before shooting him in the dick first and then shooting him in the head, which is crazy. And Charlie asks Sydney if she's got it figured out yet. Then we get a moment of Jill monologue in which she even says, Sydney this, Sydney that, Sydney. And it just makes me laugh because that's just a little bit cheesy to me. I mean, really, it's like a Marsha Brady reference right there. I don't know. But anyway, we move on here into the third act, where we do get some, better moments and some good callbacks. One of the best ones, in my opinion, being, the Billy and Stu reference as Charlie prepares to be stabbed by Jill. And he hits the line, get it up, shoulder me, wanting her to stab him in the shoulder. But Jill, a little bit predictably, stabs him directly in the heart and then tells him, what the media really loves is a sole survivor. As she tells him, Trevor was your partner and you were the idea man. So not only was she, planning to frame Trevor, but she was going to double cross Charlie all along, be the sole survivor and say that Trevor and Charlie were the two Ghostface, which is probably a better plan on her part, considering I'd say a lot of Charlie's DNA is around some of these bodies. So, on Jill's part, probably a good idea, although in my opinion, a little bit predictable. From there, Jill and Sydney kind of face off, and she tells Sydney it was never about killing you, it was about becoming you. But she says Sydney does have to die before she stabs Sydney in the gut and then proceeds to go full Jim Carrey in Liar Liar. I'm kicking my ass, damn I! And kick her own ass here, which is an entertaining scene, if nothing else, as she claws her face with Sydney's nails. She uses Sydney's hand to, rip out a chunk of her own hair. She stabs herself in the shoulder by, running the knife into the wall, and then runs into a glass picture frame before then throwing herself backwards, into a glass table. She then barely makes it over to Trevor, leaves the knife beside him, and then passes out directly beside Sydney, pretty much in the same pose as Sydney is, incapacitated in after Jill has stabbed her, as we hear, the sirens approaching and the cops about to arrive, which to me, I always thought that would have been a crazy place to end the movie right there, is credits roll and we really don't know what happened. And, maybe if they would have been able to continue with, a Scream 5, maybe getting Emma Roberts to return or something, they would have done that. Instead, though, we go to the hospital, which is a bit of another issue of a hat on a hat, in my opinion, almost like a double ending. But at least they do call it out here momentarily, which I'll get to. As we're in the hospital, Dewey is talking to Jill and says Sydney is still hanging on, as, Jill asks about it and says, I wish Sydney was still with us too. And Dewey says, it's kind of touch and go, but she's still in the ICU currently. Dewey then goes to see Gail and tells her that Jill has told him that she feels like her and Gail should write a book together because they have matching stab wounds in their shoulder. And that is when we get the smarts of Gail kicking in, as she asks, how did she know I was stabbed in the shoulder too? And that's kind of when we learn, or when Dewey and Gail kind of both realize, oh shit, it's Jill, which leads to Dewey rushing out of the room. And of course, at this point, after learning that Sydney was still alive, Jill's already shown up in Sydney's hospital room asking, "You just won't die, will you? Who are you, Michael fucking Myers?" Which I think is a great quote, but I'm biased, obviously, being the big Halloween fan that I am, that being my favorite franchise, but I do love that quote. As a fight then breaks out between Jill and Sydney before Dewey does come rushing into the room, only to be knocked out by Jill beating him with a bedpan, which is a little bit of comedy, a little bit of dark comedy involved with the beating of the bedpan. And this is where we get Jill kind of calling out the double ending, as I talked about earlier, as she says, the ending of the movie was supposed to be at the house. This is just silly. And I'm like, at least they called it out there, because I guess they all knew kind of how we would feel about that double ending. But then Sydney responds, "Consider this an alternate ending." Man, Sydney's got some great one-liners, like an action star of the 90s or something. So sometimes she's such a badass. But of course, not long thereafter, Gail shows up in the room and is ironically saved by Deputy Judy, who dives in and tackles her just before Jill gets a shot off at Gail. That was a little bit that was unexpected, and I think they did a good job to set that up by teasing their rivalry earlier. And then you get the ironic save of Judy, saving Gail's life here at the end of the movie. And then Judy is forced to give up her gun because Jill is threatening to shoot Dewey, who she is beside there. And of course, as soon as Judy stands up, Jill shoots Judy, and then she forces Gail to come out at gunpoint as well, not realizing that Sydney is now awake and has fired up a defibrillator in the room. And Gail asks for one final word. She pleads for that from Jill before Jill takes her out. And Jill says, "What is it?" And Gail says, "Clear," as she realizes that Sydney has fired up that defibrillator. And of course, as soon as Gail says "clear," we get the paddles on the temples of Jill on each side of her head. And you get a nice line here yet again. Another badass Sidney Prescott moment as she says, "You forgot the rule of remakes. Don't fuck with the original." God, you gotta love those one-liners from Sidney. But despite the fact that she got defibbed, you got to have her pop back up for one final scare, as is customary here in the Scream movies. And of course, she does pop up for that final scare moment behind Sydney. But again, Sydney is expecting it, being the badass that she is, immediately turns around, shoots Jill directly in the head. And then we get the nice reveal of Deputy Judy popping back up, revealing she was wearing a bulletproof vest, so she survives as well, which that bulletproof vest feels familiar, if we remember from, Scream 3 with both Sydney and Roman, so maybe another bit of a callback there. And then we get multiple reporters outside talking about Jill Roberts as a survivor and a hero, as, she kind of gets her wanted fame, although it's going to be short-lived once the truth comes out. But outside, the reporters are talking about it as credits roll on Scream 4. And that's the movie there for Scream 4. A nice little rundown of the plot, if you will. And I think that, like I said, this is one that's probably grown on me over time. There are things that I'm not the biggest fan of. I think I did a good job to kind of point those out throughout there. The main one being Jill being Ghostface. I think we get some good moments with it throughout that third act, as I talked about. I love some of the quotes and some of the back and forth with her and Sydney. I think the motive, checks out and stuff, but just her being Ghostface has always bumped me a little bit. So that knocks this one down a little bit for me, but I still think overall Scream 4 is a really good time. It was a great return for the franchise after, a long hiatus. And of course, it always will be the one that is the last one that Wes Craven got a chance to direct. So that's special in and of itself. And for me, I think if I'm talking rating here for Scream 4, I'm going to go with a 7.5 out of 10 is where I land at for Scream 4. Still a very good movie, still well above average. And I'm, not hating on it by any means. There's pieces of it that I don't like, but I think a 7.5 is a very solid score here for Scream 4 from 2011 as we make our way through the Scream franchise and the lead up to Scream 7. So close now, we can almost taste it, but still 2 more Scream reviews coming at you throughout this week. We'll get Scream 5 out soon and Scream 6 review out soon before we start to talk Scream 7 later this week. Can't wait to do it with you guys here on the channel. Let me know your thoughts on this movie down in the comment section, or anything you want to talk about Scream, horror movie related, or anything for that matter. Always enjoy chatting movies with you guys. Plus, those interactions help me to continue to grow the channel. Be back to talk to you guys again soon. Appreciate you tuning into this one, and I will catch you on the next one.